My name is Robert Hale. I'm 67 years old, and every year on the 14th of April, I wake before sunrise, load my truck with sandpaper and linseed oil, and a small can of the same dark walnut stain I have used for 11 years, and drive to Millbrook Park on the east side of town. The bench is in the corner where the path curves toward the pond. My wife Eleanor chose that spot the first summer we were married. She said the light hit the water there in a way that made her feel like the world had slowed down just for her. She used to bring a book and sit for an hour every Sunday morning while I slept in. When she died pancreatic cancer, 11 years ago this April, I didn't know what to do with Sundays. I still don't, entirely, but I know what to do with the bench. The park doesn't know I'm the one who maintains it. I come early enough that no one is there. I sand away the winter's damage, apply the stain, check the bolts, replace any board that has started to give. I'm a retired carpenter. It takes me about 2 hours. By the time the morning walkers arrive, I'm already gone. I never told anyone. Eleanor would have said it was unnecessary. She would have said the Park Service had people for that. She also would have understood, if I'm honest, because she knew the way I showed love was with my hands. I built things. I fixed things. I kept things from falling apart. When she was gone, there was nothing left to build, so I found the next best thing. The morning I met Frances, I was late. I had stopped at the hardware store for a replacement bolt, and the owner had wanted to talk the way he always does, and by the time I pulled into the park lot, it was nearly 7. I could see from the path that someone was already sitting on the bench. She was about 65, silver-haired, with a blue wool scarf and a book open on her lap. She wasn't reading. She was looking at the water the way Eleanor used to look at it, that same unhurried attention, as if the pond were telling her something she already knew but needed to hear again. I stood on the path with my supply bag and didn't know what to do. I needed to check the right side bolt. It had been loose last year, and I didn't want to leave it another week. She must have heard me because she looked up. She had the kind of face that had clearly laughed a great deal over the years and was not embarrassed about it. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," I said. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I just need to check something on the bench, if you don't mind." She looked at the bench, then at my bag, then at me. "Are you with the Park Service?" "No." She waited. I realized I was going to have to say something. "I maintain this bench," I said. "I have for about 11 years. It's a personal arrangement." She looked at the bench again with new attention, the way people look at something when they've learned it has a history. "What kind of personal arrangement?" "My wife used to sit here. She passed 11 years ago. I keep it up in her memory." I set down the bag. It sounds stranger out loud than it does in my head. She was quiet for a moment. "It doesn't sound strange," she said. "It sounds like love with nowhere left to go." I looked at her. No one had ever described it that way, and it was so accurate I didn't know what to do with it. "I'll move," she said, starting to close her book. "Please don't," I said. "I only need the right side. I can work around you." She settled back. I crouched by the right arm of the bench and checked the bolt. It had held through the winter. I tightened it a quarter turn, checked the 2 boards beneath the seat, found nothing concerning. I stood and brushed the knees of my jeans. "All good," I said. "Good," she said, looking at the water. I should have left. I picked up my bag and stood there instead. "Did you know her well?" she asked. "Your wife." 41 years, I said. She nodded slowly. That's long enough to make the quiet very loud. I put my bag down again without meaning to and sat on the far end of the bench. She didn't seem surprised. Her name was Frances Elm. She had moved to Millbrook 8 months earlier from Portland, where she had spent 30 years as a hospice nurse. She had never married, not for lack of love, she said, but because the work had taken most of what she had, and she had given it willingly. She lived now in a small house on Birch Street, with a garden she was still learning, and a cat named Aldous, who disapproved of most things. "Why Millbrook?" I asked. "I drove through it once, years ago. In October. The trees along the main street were extraordinary. I thought, if I ever stop, I want to stop somewhere that looks like that in October. She glanced at me. It took me 30 more years to stop. We sat for another 20 minutes. The light on the water did what Eleanor always said it did. I hadn't sat on this bench in 11 years. I had always come to maintain it and then left. I didn't trust myself to sit on it. But somehow, with Frances beside me talking about October trees and a cat named Aldous, it felt less like trespassing on a grief and more like honoring it properly. When she stood to leave, she held out her hand. Frances Elm. Robert Hale. "Thank you for the bench, Robert," she said. "I've sat here 4 times this week. It's the best seat in the park." I drove home and sat in my kitchen for a long time thinking about that. I went back the following Sunday. Not on maintenance business. Everything was in order. I went because it was Sunday morning and the bench was there, and Frances might be too. She was. She had brought 2 cups of coffee in a small thermos and poured one without asking. We sat and watched a pair of ducks move across the surface of the pond in that unhurried, purposeful way ducks have, as if they were going somewhere important but had agreed not to rush. She told me about hospice work. Not the hard parts, or not only those, but the texture of it. What it was like to sit with people at the end of things. She said most people, in the final weeks, stopped caring about the large regrets. It was always the small ones that surfaced. The trip not taken, the phone call not returned. The Sunday morning spent somewhere other than where they most wanted to be. Where did most of them most want to be? I asked. Exactly where they were, she said, but earlier, with more time. I thought about Eleanor. She had been in the hospital for 6 weeks. In the last days, she had held my hand and told me not to make the house a museum. She said, and I had thought about this sentence for 11 years, "Love is not a monument, it's a practice." I told Frances that. She was quiet for a moment. "She was right," she said. "And you've been practicing." The bench. The bench, she agreed. But also this. She gestured vaguely between us, meaning I understood the sitting and the talking and the 2 cups of coffee on a Sunday morning. I looked at the water. Something in my chest shifted, the way things shift when a window is opened in a room that has been closed for a long time. We fell into a rhythm the way people do when neither of them is in a hurry. Sunday mornings at the bench, occasional Tuesday afternoons at the diner on 4th Street. She came to see the workshop behind my house where I still built furniture for the grandchildren of people I'd known for years, small repairs for neighbors. She ran her hand along a half-finished side table and said it felt like a decision, which was the most accurate description of good joinery I had ever heard. I went with her to the farmer's market and learned that she had strong opinions about tomatoes and no patience for decorative gourds. I met Aldous, who regarded me with the professional skepticism of a cat who had seen a great deal of human behavior and remained unconvinced of its merit. By November, he was sleeping on my jacket when I left it on her couch, which Frances said was the highest possible endorsement. One evening in December, we were sitting in her kitchen after dinner, the first real cold of the year pressing against the windows, and she said, without preamble, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to not make it into more than it is." I waited. "I spent 30 years sitting with people who were dying," she said. "And the thing I learned, the thing I would tell anyone if they asked me, is that love at the end of your life looks different than love at the beginning. It's quieter. It doesn't need to prove itself. It just wants company and a reason to make coffee for 2. She looked at her cup. "I'm not telling you I'm in love with you. I'm telling you that when I walk to the park on Sunday morning, I hope you'll be there. And when you're not there, I notice it. And that is not nothing at my age." I set down my cup. "Frances, you don't have to say anything." "I want to say something." I looked at her across the table. "Eleanor told me love is a practice. I thought I was practicing it by maintaining the bench. I think I was wrong. I think I was only preparing to practice it." I paused. "You're what the practice looks like." She looked at me for a long moment. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall, light and unhurried. the way snow falls when it has all night. That's a very well-built sentence, she said, for a carpenter. I laughed a full, unguarded laugh I hadn't heard from myself in years. She smiled and the kitchen felt warmer than the radiator could account for. The following April 14th, I arrived at the bench before sunrise, as I always had. Sandpaper, linseed oil, dark walnut stain. I worked through the familiar routine in the early quiet, checking every board, every bolt. When I was finished, I sat down on the bench for only the second time in 11 years. Frances arrived at 7 with the thermos. She sat beside me and poured without asking, the way she always did. We looked at the light on the water. It did what Eleanor always said it did. "Same time next year?" Frances said. "Same time next year," I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I put my arm around her. The ducks were back on the pond, going their purposeful, unhurried way. The bench held us both without complaint, solid and warm in the April morning, as if it had always been waiting for exactly this. I think Eleanor would have approved. She always did prefer the bench when there were 2 people on it.